All right. We have a nice group of, I guess, 16 folks right now. Um, I'll get this started so we can also finish this early. There is no pressure, absolutely, to keep this running and make everyone suffer. Be that as it may, welcome, everyone. Welcome to our USC Career Center DCLN led event titled Future in and of Humanities. My name is Nisarg, and I'm working as a DCLN lead for Humanities for this year. Today we have a very exciting event planned for the humanist on this campus or whoever is left, the last generation of humanist, featuring our own USC PhD alumni and moderated by my wonderful colleague Aidan Diamond, a currently PhD candidate in CSLC program here at USC. I will hand over floor to Aidan in a moment to introduce our panelist and get this conversation going. However, before I do that, brief words about how this event would run today. Aidan would introduce the panelists and begin the discussion with a series of what I thought were both wonderful and fantastic questions about careers in humanities. This will run, let's say, for hopefully around 30-40 minutes. And after that, we will open up the floor for questions from the audience. I'm hoping that the moderated discussion in the beginning will make everyone here less shy and more comfortable in asking questions to the panelist. And finally, as we end or reach near the end of the event, which completely we are the one who are going to decide how long this runs. Sarah O from the USC Career Center, who would be joining us shortly, will highlight some resources that the university offers to current students as they enter the job market. I hope this sounds good to you all and that you are kind of hopefully a bit excited as we were while putting this together. We have been very fortunate, I would say, to have such a great panel of scholars who work within, adjacent to, and beyond academia. And I'm hoping that everyone here can take advantage of their experience and expertise in surviving beyond PhD. One small request, please turn your camera on. So first of all, I mean, our guests don't feel like they're talking to blank screens. And second of all, it also makes hopefully this whole thing more social and everyone kind of have a good time. That's all that matters. That's how the career starts. With that said, Aidan, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Nisarg. I am so excited to moderate today's discussion. I'm going to start by briefly introducing our wonderful panelists. Our first panelist is Eva Adams. She is a translator and scholar of contemporary Latin American writing with a focus on Mapuche poetry. Her translation of Daniela Catravero's Gorilla Blooms was longlisted for this year's National Translation Award in Poetry and published by Eulalia Books in 2024. Her translations have appeared in anthologies such as Best Literary Translations and La Lucha, Latin American Feminism Today, as well as various literary journals. She is currently an assistant professor of Romance languages and literatures at Bowdoin College. Emma Ayoun is an assistant professor of film and media at the SUNY Fashion Institute of Technology. She holds a PhD in cinema and media studies from USC and an MST in film aesthetics from the University of Oxford. Her writing on topics including ability theory, experimental documentary, animal studies, virtual reality, and contagion in cinema have been published in Camera Obscura, Journal Cinema and Media Studies, Visual Anthropology, World Records, and The Velvet Light Traps, as well as other various publications. Jessica D. Breyer is a curator and historian of art and design with a focus on modernism and the intersecting histories of photography, print, and design. She serves as a curator of photography at the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center at Vassar College, where she co-organized the exhibitions Making a Life in Photography, Rolly McKenna, and On Grid, Ways of Seeing in Print, both of which were accompanied by catalogs co-published by Vassar College and Scala Arts publishers. First Type of Photo, New Typography, and the Reinvention of Photography, was published last year by the University of Minnesota Press, and you may have seen her event with BSRI last week. And finally, Stephanie Sparling Williams is the Andrew W. Mellon Curator of American Art at the Brooklyn Museum. Before coming to the Brooklyn Museum, she was the Associate Curator at the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum and a visiting lecturer in art history and Americana studies at Mount Holyoke College. She also holds the 2026 Anschutz Distinguished Fellowship in American Studies at the Afron Center for the Study of America at Princeton University. Her book, Speaking Out of Turn, Lorraine O'Grady and the Art of Language, was awarded the 32nd Annual James A. Porter Book Award. And her recent work, Toward a Joy, New Frameworks for American Art, reimagines how contemporary audiences experience historic American art. So thank you all so much for joining us. This is enormously exciting. I want to start off by giving you each a moment to briefly reflect on where you are now, how you got there from the PhD, and anything you would like to introduce to the discussion to start off with. Or we can move forward.
Do you have an order you would like us to go
Yeah,
in?
sorry if you just want to know who should go first.
No, feel free to jump in as suits you.
Let's go in alphabetical order, like they
right.
introduced us.
Okay, Edie, you want to start off?
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, so first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for Nisarg for organizing this event. So much goes into this whole process of organization. So I really appreciate all that you did to bring us all here together. So I'm relatively new to my position. I defended my dissertation in May and started my current position at Bowdoin College in the fall. So I can speak to having very recently been on the job market and as someone who's very new to a tenure track position and kind of what that transition has been like. So, yeah, I'd be really excited to share some experiences from the job market, but also what it's been like in this first year being in a tenure track job.
Hi, everyone. I thank you to my fellow presenters. I'm so excited to meet all of you. And also thank you so much to Nisarg for organizing this and for inviting me to be a part of it. And I started at FIT in my position, I guess now 2.5 years ago. I defended my dissertation in 2022 and completed a postdoc at USC the following year. So it sort of feels like I just extended the PhD by a year, even though I didn't, but I didn't move or change much about my daily life. And then I moved. So it's been 2.5 years now since I started. So I am a little more, I've had a little more time than Edie, although I still also feel like it's a brand new position. And I think I can speak to, or hopefully I can speak to the way it feels to shift to a very different kind of environment from a place like USC, because where I'm now is a public institution. It's an art school. I had no idea that I grew up in New York, and I had no idea that FIT was a state university. And I also had no idea that they had a film and media program until I found out about this position. So it's a very, very different teaching and working environment than USC. So I hope that if anyone's curious, I can speak to what it's like to teach in that kind of space and to work in that kind of space.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again. I'll just repeat the thank yous to Aidan and Nisarg for convening this conversation and for inviting me. I think this is really important to have these conversations and to come to things like this when you're working on your PhD. I think it can be really easy to kind of just go into the whole of research and disciplinary talks and sort of not zoom out and think about the professional context. And I think this is really important for kind of demystifying the whole process. So I have been at my current institution for almost 6 years. So I work at a museum within a college, a small liberal arts college. And it started out as more of a postdoc. It was a curatorial fellowship that then I was lucky enough to kind of grow that position into a full curator position, which I've held for the last couple of years, 3 years, I think. So it was a postdoc that really sort of turned into something longer, which was very lucky for me. So that has been my trajectory in this job so far. And, I can sort of speak to both a museum, but also kind of the context of museum work within academia. So I kind of have a foot in both of those realms at the moment.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Just echoing everything that's already been shared. Excited to be here. I definitely feel like this is an important step. And one that I didn't feel like was available. Like this idea of professionalization was kind of very foreign when I think I'm the longest out too. I am just 10 years from graduating, so 2016. And I can really speak to, I took a pretty non-traditional postdoc also in a museum setting, so at the Yale University Art Gallery. I can speak to teaching across a number of contexts. I've taught at Phillips Academy, which is an elite private boarding school. I've taught in the UMass system. I've taught in the Connecticut State School system. I've taught at liberal arts colleges, and have held a number of fellowships. I could speak to the job market. I actually share the unpopular belief that the job market is a lot of fun, and I quite enjoyed it and have enjoyed it every time I go on the job market. And I take great pleasure coaching and like mentoring students through the job market process. And so if you have questions, again, that like project of demystifying the job market and getting creative and strategic about your options and how you go about accomplishing your various interests and goals, I think is something that I'm also excited to speak to and share. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start with Jessica and Stephanie, if I may, since you're both working beyond academia or in academic adjacent positions. How have you converted your academic skills to this non or alternative academic in context, and what advice would you give to PhDs who are looking for alternatives to academia? Jessica, why don't you start?
Sure. So I think, well, so I also had a context, or I had a museum position before I came back to academia for the PhD. But I think one of the biggest skills that one has to have kind of moving between academia and other spaces is kind of making ideas accessible. And sort of the idea of accessibility is really an important one in museum work. We're dealing with, a non-specialist audience for the most part. And at an academic museum, we're sort of appealing to a lot of different kinds of audiences and a lot of levels of knowledge, which is true of a civic museum as well. So I think when I came into this position, having just finished my PhD, I had to do a little bit of untraining from, writing and speaking in a way that was really for my field, for people in the field, for specialists, and learning how to translate that back into a way of speaking that is more accessible, both in the context of writing, so writing something like a museum label, but also just in communicating ideas, right? Pitching ideas for exhibitions or publications. I think that to me was one of the biggest kind of learning curves, even though I'd already had a job in the field prior to becoming a PhD. But so much of our training in the PhD, of course, is to write at a specialist level, right? We're writing for academic journals, for academic publication, we're giving papers at academic conferences. I mean, all of the training is really for that. And so translating ideas into, contexts that connect with other people in other disciplines, I think is a big challenge. And to me, a really interesting challenge and why I, work in museums. This is something that I enjoy. And I think rather than it being a kind of hindrance or watering down of content, I think of it as something that only enriches what we do, and certainly enriches the humanities. So that I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll just build on that. I won't add, but I think your audience expands, which is really exciting. It comes with a lot of responsibility. I think maybe 6 people read anything I wrote when I was at USC. And then, my audience is now a global audience. And I think, of course, depending on your field, but it's a huge shift. I will also say that you go from doing independent work, at least for most of us. I mean, even those of us who do things like ethnography or, you're working in kind of like a participant observation mode, you go from doing work that's like completely individual and I think often isolating. At least that's the experience I had when I was doing a humanities PhD, is I spent a lot of time by myself and I spent a lot of time by myself reading. You go into a field like, working within the museum, and you actually then start having a lot of thought partnership and a lot of collaboration. So I think skills of like working with folks, networking, being strategic, understanding institutional structures, I think is something that the PhD doesn't really prepare you well for, but like understanding how institutions work, understanding business, like I think, thank God I had a corporate business woman as a mother. So it wasn't foreign to me, or I could talk through and navigate how operations work. I think a lot of these things were sheltered from when we're doing humanities PhDs, and I kind of felt like kind of self-important, and I was going into these spaces and, these were just very practically operating spaces. So I had to like recalibrate both how I existed in space, but also you get a different set of wherewithal, right? And I think institutional knowledge and navigating, business savvy, like managing budgets, understanding kind of things within your purview. I started managing people, which I think is not something that, you're necessarily prepared for. So I think in addition to like audience expansion, there are all these other skills that come along with working outside of academia. But I actually think that some of these skills you actually end up learning and needing in academia if you like are, become a dean or become a chair of a department, all these things that you're not necessarily prepared for, but you build out.
Thank you so much. And conversely, for Emma and Edie, both of you have found academic positions in your track, I believe. So what tips would you give to current PhD students who are going on the job market? What have you learned as you've made the transition from PhD to tenure track?
I can kick things off. So I was thinking about this question in terms of what I wish my job market self had known. And I am maybe the opposite of Stephanie in that I found the job market to be incredibly painful and challenging. And I ended up with a tenure track job, but I received an enormous amount of rejections. And I think I found that process to be really demoralizing and made me kind of lose a lot of confidence. And so I think the first thing that I would say now, being on the other side, is just to really remember that it is not personal. Something that I'm seeing now, being on the flip side, is there are so many complex dynamics that go into a job search. You're navigating what everyone in the department is looking for. They may have conflicting interests. You're navigating a lot of different personalities within a department. And so it really does seem to me that it's just specific institutions who happen to be looking for a specific thing at a certain time. And so I think just reminding yourself that it is not personal and that you're doing really good work. And even if someone ends up in a tenure track job, they probably got a whole slew of rejections that accompany that. So that's the first thing. I also, something I've been talking a lot about with some of my friends who are still at USC who are on the job market right now is that, at least in my field, there are so few positions available that it can create this real kind of scarcity mindset where you feel like you would just be lucky to get any academic job, so you should just take whatever you get. And I think something that I wish I had done a bit more is think about the type of institution or job that will make academia livable for you and sustainable for you. Because so I ended up at Bowdoin College, which is a beautiful liberal arts college, and I love it there because I get to focus on teaching. And something I realized during my PhD was that teaching is what made the PhD sustainable for me. I think if I'd ended up at an R1, I would be very unhappy right now because I wouldn't be able to focus on teaching in the same way that I am at a liberal arts college. So I recognize that, for many of us, we do have to take whatever job we get, but I wish I had been a little more focused maybe in applying to the kinds of positions that would make academia sustainable for me long term.
I couldn't agree more. Edie, I think really covered a lot of what I also feel. And I actually recently, last year, I also got to serve on a search committee at FIT, which was a really illuminating experience, and taught me a lot from the other side. And so I think, similarly to what Edie said, I think it can be very hard near the end of the PhD not to feel as though what's being assessed is your value as a mind and as a person, which certainly isn't the case. And also, I think hard not to feel like that obligation to just take what comes. And I think that, yeah, I don't want to get too repetitive. I agree. I think thinking about really your quality of life and what matters to you is really, really important. Because I don't want to sound too negative, but I think everybody knows people who got a dream job and arrived at that job and found that for all manner of reasons, whether it was living really far away from everyone in their community or maybe being the only person who wasn't from the US in a part of the country where they felt really alienated for that reason or any other thing, discovered that they hated it. And conversely, a job that seems like it might not be right can turn out to be really wonderful. So I think having as much of a sense as possible of what matters to you day to day. I also, I kind of knew, especially when I was applying during my postdoc for jobs, that like Edie, actually teaching was really, really important to me. And I wanted to be in a place that would allow me to really prioritize that in certain respects, at least. The other thing I would just say is having been on a job search committee, um, and this is like easier said than done, but to be yourself as much as you can, by which I mean to think about it's again also very hard not to feel, especially because there's so many, well-meaning institutions and people who will tell you this is the right way to write your cover letter and all of your materials and everything. And it's worth taking all of that advice into consideration. And some of that advice was very helpful. But when I was on a search committee, it was really, really clear when we were reading like 100 applications for the same position, who had, even if they were maybe a wonderful person, who had kind of taken a boilerplate cover letter and tried to slot in as many things as possible, and who was writing from their own voice a little bit more, who was really making themselves known as they were. And that coupled with a kind of clear sense of like enthusiasm, and when we could tell that somebody had spent a little bit of time thinking about the job and that they actually wanted that job and not any job, and they'd kind of slotted in. And I know that makes more work in some contexts and isn't always possible, and sometimes you do have to apply for a job you don't, it's not your dream job, because one's dream job doesn't always come up. But I think when we were able to sense someone's kind of confidence in who they were as a scholar, as a teacher, that went really far in helping them stand out, and helping us get to know them as a candidate in that very impersonal process where, like you said, Evie, like it was devastating. I realized during this job search, we had 100 people. I think, maybe 80 of them would have probably been fantastic fits for this position. And so we had to choose based on so many different factors. But I think I think that the truer you are to yourself in the process, the easier it will feel, even to weather rejection and all of the challenges that come with it.
Thank you so much. So since we're on the topic of the job market, I was wondering if you all four of you would be willing to speak to the kinds of positions you applied to, how you evaluated and chose the positions you applied to, especially as these positions were relevant or perhaps a little more distant from your own expertise, and how did you market yourselves, so to speak, in these job application processes and interviews?
I can start us off if that's okay. So I applied to literally anything and everything. And I think the reason why the job market was so, maybe fun wasn't aggressive, later it became fun, but USC was so terrible for me that the job market felt like liberation. Like it felt like a get out of jail free card. Like I ran, I fled, like I went to the job market with just the utmost enthusiasm. And I applied for literally anything. I had a job talk um, in Utrecht, in the Netherlands. I had a job talk in Flensburg, Germany. You know, like I applied for everything. A maritime museum, you know, like women and gender, you know, like just literally anything that I thought that I could convince somebody that I could do this job. I applied for. So I agree with Edie. I applied for, I don't know, probably 2 dozen, 3 dozen positions. And I did. I mean, you know, I was met with some success. I think I had 6 job talks over the course, and I started applying like in my 5th year. My PhD, it was not even, it didn't even happen yet. My dissertation was not written. I was applying for jobs. So, I had a long runway, and I used kind of my, you know, modest and limited success on the job market as a motivator to get the hell out of there. So I applied for me, I was really burnt out on academia at that point. I thought it was pretty toxic. It was irredeemable. I mean, I've come a long way since then, and I've obviously navigated and worked in academia for the last decade. But at the time, I was really looking for things that I could convince my committee to write me recommendation letters for. So there was like a lot of academic adjacent jobs. I had a pretty traditional committee, and I think, you know, one of the reasons why they were, you know, begrudged the Yale University postdoc was because, or at the art museum, was because it was Yale. You know, some of the other positions I was interviewing and applying for, we didn't even get to the letters of recommendation yet. You know, I was kind of doing it kind of subversively. So all of this to say, the kinds of positions I think that humanities PhDs are particularly well qualified, you know, like you are well qualified to work within the cultural sector broadly. I genuinely believe that your skills are transferable almost like indefinitely. You know, I think that any job or any position where it requires reading, writing, critical thinking, visual analysis, I think general, like a blanket, you know, PhD in the humanities, I think you get those kinds of skills and competencies. So I think you should feel emboldened to apply creatively and strategically for positions that range from, you know, and I think also don't be afraid of seniority or rank either. Apply for like head of education departments, you know, at cultural institutions. Apply for, you know, creative director positions, you know, like it literally, I think this may be a controversial, you know, this may be controversial, but you are well positioned. You know, people who have not been you, who have presumably been in the job market working for 5 to 10 years, have that experience on them. Absolutely. But you're not starting from year one, right? You're not starting an entry level. So I want you to just be emboldened to apply, be creative. You've already proven that you can do impossible things. And so I think that some of these positions, you might have a learning curve, but I think I think you're well positioned to take on those challenges.
I'll just add to that and say I think that's really great advice and a great sentiment, that the humanities does prepare you for so many things. This is something that I teach to undergraduate students when I see them, you know, that they may not become art historians, but knowing how to think critically about what they see in the world, media literacy, textual analysis, visual analysis, these are, I agree, infinitely transferable skills and really important. And I feel like a combination of what Stephanie is saying and what Emma said a few minutes ago is really important to sort of apply widely, throw as wide of a net out there as you can, and also be yourself. Because if something comes back, right, if you get an interview or you get to do a campus visit, that's the time to turn on the who are you really, right? To be who you are, to say the things that matter to you. If you are weeded out of that job process, I truly believe that is not the job for you, and it is for the best that you don't get it. So I think this is to Emma's point, to really be yourself in how you present who you are and what matters to you. And in assessing whether to take a job, right? I think this advice about thinking about your whole life, your own well-being and sustainability as a human being is really important, right? You are not just a person with a job, you are a human, and considering really holistically what is right for you is really important. So, yeah, I think that was something that I tried to do, apply widely, but also really be myself in the context of a cover letter, certainly a job interview or a campus visit. If there were things that, I've had moments in job interviews where I've been like, oh, did I say too much? Was I too much of a human in that moment? And I actually think those are really smart things to do and can be really strategic because, again, they can weed you out of a search that maybe just wasn't right for you. If you say the wrong thing, then you're probably not a good fit. Um, and I guess the other thing I thought about when I was applying and when I have applied for things in the past is just, in that casting a wide net, kind of think strategically about the types of questions that excite you and the types of sort of approaches you have to your work. So there may not be, it may seem hard to sort of translate academic work into another context, especially a kind of civic institution or cultural institution. But job descriptions I think the subtext of job descriptions is sort of an approach to work, right? If you enjoy working collaboratively, and like Stephanie, I also found the PhD to be just incredibly isolating, and I could not wait to move on from that. So I would, be really looking for those keywords in a job description that talked about collaboration and that talked about working within a team. And, for me, museum work fills that desire. So, thinking about like the kind of things that you find fulfilling, why are you doing this work in the first place? It's probably not just because you want to answer some very specific specialized question in your academic field, right? There are bigger and broader reasons why we do the work that we do. And that can kind of be a pathway, I think, to thinking about other kinds of jobs, thinking creatively beyond tenure track positions.
I can jump in and just add a few things from the academic side. First, speaking to what you said, Jessica, about the importance of being yourself. I had a colleague recently describe to me that the relationship in a department is like a marriage because you are going to be working with these people very closely for hopefully a very long period of time. And so, in addition to, your academic qualifications, they're also looking for someone who they want to collaborate with and work with for an extensive amount of time. So I think being yourself in that context is also really important because that's they want to see that you're also a person who they can spend time with and collaborate with. The other thing I would say from my perspective is to still apply for a job, even if it feels like a stretch. Because something I found really interesting about the job that I ended up getting is that I focus on translation, and that is the thing that I love. Translation didn't appear once in the job call, and yet, all of the finalists who they brought to campus were all people working on translation. So, all to say that I think sometimes job calls also don't always articulate everything that they may actually be looking for. So, even if you may think that it's a stretch for you, I still recommend applying just because it may be the job that you end up getting. The other thing is similar to what Emma was saying. I also just to go back to the being yourself piece. When I went on the job market, I did not have a single academic publication. And I was told by most of my colleagues that that was kind of a death sentence for going on the job market because you needed to have an academic publication. But I realized very early in the PhD that for it to be livable for me, I had to pursue translation because that was the thing that made it possible for me to survive it. And that ended up being, I think, the thing that most interested the search committee. So, all to say, I think if you have a slightly unconventional path within academia, it doesn't mean that you can't get an academic job, and it may also be the thing that the committee ends up really liking about you.
I'll just add a tiny thing because everyone has, I think, touched on so many important things, and I really agree with everything that everyone said. I really agree with what you said, Edie, on the academic side, that job calls very often don't include everything. And I think if there's a position open at a place that you really want to work, that you feel is a good fit for you in other ways that you meet, at least some of the requirements for, I would also encourage people to apply. I um, my work is kind of at the intersection of disability studies and film studies, and there were a couple of calls that went out for disability media related things, and I thought this is like so perfect, and I didn't make it past the first round. And it turned out they were looking for people in public health and things that had nothing to do with what I was doing. And then I did a little bit differently. I didn't apply that widely. Which is maybe bad advice. But I think if you don't want to do that, I think it's important to make peace with, like, I think the reason I didn't apply that widely initially is because I knew that there were only a few places that I wanted to live. Um, I knew also that I would be okay, which is not true for everybody, like emotionally speaking, with shifting career paths, even for a little while. Outside of academia, and that was more important to me to be able to do certain things, that I would find alternate ways to be teaching, or doing other things I cared about. And so I actually didn't apply all that widely. And I also did the thing that everyone tells you not to do, which is I turned down the first job that I was offered. But that was a really empowering experience, because it was the first time I kind of really realized, it was a year before I got this job, that I could do that, and that would be okay, and that if I had applied for something and then by the end of it realized that it wasn't actually what felt right for me. During the PhD, you're so shepherded around and constantly at the whim of all these deadlines, and it feels like that path is going to continue to make demands of you forever. And it was very empowering to say, actually, this isn't the job that I want, and I have the right to make that decision. And in terms of, and I also just agree with what Edie was saying about sort of marketing what is unique about you. I did a lot of adjunct teaching work during my PhD. It meant that it took me longer than it might have otherwise taken me to complete the PhD. It was sometimes not always encouraged by every member of my committee. I did it because partly for financial reasons. It made it a lot easier to live in Los Angeles on a PhD stipend. And then I think I was able to take that and have at my disposal, many courses that I had created myself, which is not something you otherwise necessarily graduate with from the PhD. So I second that. And that turned out to be, at the places that I was looking to for positions, something that I think they really appreciated. So I would, encourage you to take those things that some people might not approve of as the most academically perfect thing you could do, and be able to emphasize also what you have been able to learn and take from those experiences. And the only other thing I would say about the job market is, just as silly as this sounds, um, that when I was on a search committee, I was sometimes surprised that not, how do I say this? Really prepare for your interviews. Like really, really prepare um, deeply for each specific interview. And prepare deeply, I think, because if you're not prepared, then it's very hard to turn your attention to the people that are interviewing you in the space that you're in. And I think that that can be really negative. Like if someone's giving a job talk and they're so wrapped up in their anxiety about what they're saying and they're doing, that they can't then extend openly to the people that are asking them questions, into the space that they're in, and like actually enter conversation, that can create a real distance between you and the people interviewing you for the job, who, like Edie said, are going to be, your colleagues, ultimately still in an institution. It's not just a life of the mind, for a long time. And so I really would recommend that everyone just feel really, really at ease with what it is you're going to be saying and talking about so that then you have the bandwidth to be able to improvise and be flexible and chat and do all these other things that can help you integrate into a working environment.
Thank you. You guys are so full of wisdom. It's really exciting to listen and learn from you. What struggles and challenges have you seen humanists face as we go on the job market, academic or otherwise? And how would you, or how have you seen these challenges overcome or negotiated, and successfully or not?
Can you state the first part of that question again? My internet kind of did something
Oh,
weird and I accidentally closed the written questions. What
sure.
challenges? Can you, sorry.
Yeah. What struggles or challenges have you seen humanists face as we go on the job market, the academic job market or the non-academic job market? And how have you seen them overcome or negotiated as you go in your experience?
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. A lack of confidence, a struggle for confidence. I really do feel that way. Like, I just feel that at least when I was graduating, we were all so beat down that, we go onto this job market. And especially when you're outside of academia, it's like where people don't actually understand what you've gone through. I think that just that struggle in and of itself, that transition between like, and luckily mine was kind of buffered because I did exist in academic spaces for most of my career. But yeah, I just think that it's hard to say to current, folks who are, in it in the throes now, but it's like y'all are so capable, and you are here for a reason, like whatever you need to do to, and that's why I really enjoyed the job market because it allowed me to kind of like regain some of my confidence when I felt like it was very shaken by the experience of, getting a PhD. It was like the job market was where I went to realize that actually I could do this, like I could do what I was setting out to do. And so I think that how that's often overcome, I love what Emma said because this is something I do a lot of coaching around the job market. Preparation, I think, is so, so key. Like when you get that first interview, you better stage your freaking Zoom call. You better script the heck out of, your responses, because I mean, anticipate every question they might ask you. Ask your committee to send you the questions that they had on the last search. Literally script it, practice it so much that it feels natural when you're literally reading it up under your camera. So I think the struggles of like preparations, practice scripting allows you, as Emma was saying, to just, be yourself, feel confident and comfortable. I think when you go onto an academic job market, I did several academic searches and I'm so hopeful because now I've sat on one too, and it was more humane than the ones that I was experiencing. Ask for what you need. So like ask for a schedule in advance. When you see that there are no bathroom breaks, let them know that, ask them if you would like to, insert like after this XY meeting or interview, would it be okay if I took 15 minutes? Not only do I think that that shows a real sense of like self-worth and like self-advocacy, I think it helps set you up for success. I can't tell you how I was not on my best when I was in 16 hours of like back to back to back meetings because they might only meet with you once, but you're meeting with like the 10 people they marched you through, so I just be strategic, be self-aware and self-advocating. I'm not sure if I'm linking these appropriately to struggles, but I just remember this about the job market that like you have power, you have worth, you have value, and I think assert it because I think it took me the job market to kind of reclaim that for myself after I went through the PhD.
And I'll jump in for a second to add another thing about struggles. I echo everything again that Stephanie just said. I think another job market struggle that I know I faced when I started was that it was like really frustrating. I mean, I had no idea what these materials were really supposed to look like. They exist in this kind of, like magical mystery space, and it can feel very awkward to ask people to share. People have their, understandable kind of feelings of privacy around their own stuff. And so there were times when it really felt like guesswork too, where I was like, I don't quite understand if I'm writing a statement of intent or purpose or whatever. I don't, and I like, then what should go extra in the teaching statement and what should go extra in the research statement and what's the tone that I should be striking with these things. And I think that was like a source of a lot of confusion for me at the beginning. And I mean, this was kind of a one-off, but during COVID, the big cinema studies conference held this kind of since no one could meet in person, they held this sort of thing where you could sort of sign up to be paired up with like a mentor, someone more advanced in the field who would read your materials and give you feedback on them. And I would just, really encourage everyone to just ask around and ask your friends what they think and what they're thinking about. And I feel very fortunate. I really loved the community of people that I was doing my PhD with. I know it's not always easy. Not everyone has easy relations with their cohort or their classmates, but to the best of your ability, I think just, yeah, trying to figure that out can be really challenging. And it's much easier if you're not alone, because I think it can often feel during the PhD, or it felt to me like sometimes as if I'd missed a bus that everyone else had gotten on, where I was like, everyone seems to know how to write this thing. I don't know how to write it. And everyone else seems to have already done this, and I've never even heard of it. And so I think talking to older faculty mentors, people who maybe aren't going to be competing for these jobs with you and therefore won't be as uncomfortable about sharing these things as some people might be, or just kind of even just talking it out, I think can be really helpful. And I also really echo, I was really happy to say that recently a friend of mine was up for a position and we staged an interview in full. I fake interviewed her for a full hour, and we even like practiced her camera angles so that she wouldn't be worried about where to put her laptop and everything. And she got it. So, and I think, I don't think it was me that made it happen, but I think it helped her feel much more confident. So, but yeah, I think asking people and not being embarrassed if there's some part of the process that feels completely foreign and that you don't know anything about, was really, really helpful to me.
Thank you so much. Um, as we move towards the end of our conversation, I would like to ask you what has been the most difficult part of transitioning out of the PhD into your careers, and what has been the most rewarding part of doing so?
I can start. As someone who very recently did the transition, I think all the change, I think I had this idea that being a faculty member would be more or less similar to what it was like to be a graduate student. And that's not been the case. There are a lot of things that are similar, but there's also a very different pace. There are very different demands on your time. And I think, Stephanie, you mentioned this earlier, but remembering that you're also forming part of an institution. And I think that that's been something really interesting to me about being a faculty member is realizing that you are not just doing your research and teaching your classes, but that you're also thinking about things like enrollment numbers and how to support your students through the major and how do you offer the correct number of classes so that students can complete the major in a certain amount of time. And at Bowdoin, we have all faculty meetings. So faculty members are also directly in dialogue with deans and the president and thinking about some of the bigger issues that are happening at the institution. And so I think that was something that as a graduate student, I don't know that I was really aware that that was part of the job. I also think that something that's been a challenge is that you're entering into a totally new environment. And as a new faculty member, you're entering into a department often where there are folks who have decades of history with one another, and there are decades of history within your department. And I think for me, something that's been a challenge is just figuring out my place within that long history and kind of where to insert myself and where to just sort of step back and learn it over time and accept that I won't know all that history right away. Um, but I think that what's been really rewarding is getting to teach and be a mentor in a way that wasn't necessarily possible for me when I was a graduate student. I really love that I get to be like a teacher as like the fullest part of my life, and that's been really exciting because it always felt sort of sidelined to my research when I was at USC, and I love that it's something that I can now really center really fully. And just thinking to the institution, I feel really excited to be at a place where everyone genuinely cares about making Bowdoin the best place it can be, and it's nice to feel like part of a community where people are all working towards that kind of shared goal in community. I think that sometimes community felt hard to find in the PhD because it can be so isolating. And I've really liked being at an institution where there's more of a focus on that kind of community. So yeah.
I'll just briefly add something on the tenure track jobs side of things, which is just that for me, the most challenging and the most rewarding parts have been kind of the same thing, which is, and I know it can feel during the PhD like you're in the void, and it certainly did to me lots of the time, but there was still a sense of what I ought to be doing. Um, Generally speaking, and a kind of clear, hurdle. And I think sometimes it has been challenging getting into this position and realizing that even more than I like that it is what I make of it ultimately. That that I have a certain amount of autonomy over my time and what I decide to do and where I decide to focus my energy, and also that if I want certain opportunities, no one is waiting for an email from me with an update on how I'm doing in my research or anything else like that. We have a really short tenure track at FIT, so I'm actually up for tenure this semester. So I know where those expectations are, but otherwise, it's kind of just, yeah, it's kind of up to me to decide what I want to do. And sometimes that can be really overwhelming and intense. And then at the same time, it's also amazing. It's amazing to feel that I have that feeling, that ability to decide where my energy goes. And um, kind of be at the helm of my own classes or my relationships with my students or the things I'm doing, the service at the university and so on. So managing everything when you don't have anyone else kind of holding you to task can be difficult. And one thing I didn't foresee exactly was, especially working at a public institution, that's also that has a very specific kind of setup, was how much service I would be called upon to do, which is a lot. I'm on a lot of committees. But yeah, having that kind of freedom to determine what I do and how I do it has been extraordinary. And getting to center teaching has also been amazing. So
I think I'll just add one that came to me when I was listening to folks, that's on a bit more of a personal front, but I think a struggle to protect one's mental health is something that I don't know that it's necessarily the responsibility of the university to prepare you for, but I want to just suggest that it's something you want to think about and guard, because now after completing a PhD, 2 books, and now a massive like professional like career project, every single time I felt very sad and very lost afterwards. And it's not because I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but I think the first time, so when I was in your shoes, like after I finished my PhD, nobody told me that I might feel like, even with a job, like even with a lot of competitive prospects, that I might feel lost or kind of disassociative, or like it's pretty common, like, do some Googling, but like, after you finish huge life like moments, that you feel sad or that you feel like kind of lost. And so I just want to put that on folks' radar because nobody warned me. You might get the best job ever, and the job market is certainly can be stressful, and like your end of your PhD might be stressful, but I just protect your mental health. Like mental health is a real struggle. And I think especially in this moment, and maybe put some guardrails up for yourself. Because I think any transition you go through is a big deal. Like I think it's a very big deal. I think PhDs also felt, and hopefully they're different now, but I guess thematically now, mine wasn't super empowering. Like I felt pretty infantilized. I felt pretty lost afterwards. So I think just whatever you need to do as you transition to being like in a different space in your career, just look out for your mental health.
Yeah, amen to that. I just want to say I think that's so true. I certainly felt that when I finished my PhD, and I also felt that way when I published my book, which felt was a huge accomplishment, and it was wonderful. And I also felt really sad and weird afterward because this is the nature of finishing something that's really momentous. So I think Stephanie's advice is really wise. And I would also just add, I mean, something I also found the PhD to be pretty infantilizing, but one thing that was quite valuable about it, besides the degree itself, is the amount of time that you actually do have to do research and to think deeply on a topic over a long period of time. And I still, as hard as graduate school was, I do think of that as a gift that I gave myself really by doing the PhD. So it's something just to keep in mind, right? Because it feels like a kind of race to the finish, especially if you're kind of in your final years or ABD, and just to take stock of um, that, being able to have that time to really do sustained research and writing and thinking, because when you're in a job, the demands of teaching, the demands of service, the demands of meetings and mentorship, and all of these things tend to take precedence over that. And then you have to somehow carve out time. I don't know how anyone writes a second book, honestly. Like I'm still trying to figure that out for myself, having published one. So that is something that's maybe a challenge of leaving the PhD, and also maybe just a reminder to savor it while you're there, and not forget that is something really unique to being a PhD student or being ABD, to be able to have that.
Thank you so much. At this point, I would like to open the floor to questions. You can ask a question by raising your hand and I'll call on you, or you can put your question in the chat. Yes, Nicole.
Hi. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. And I'm a senior actually on the law track, but I was really interested in humanities and the intellectual aspect of it. So I really appreciate the different perspectives that you guys gave. Actually, you answered quite a lot of my questions as you were talking. I had to erase some of them. But a question that I have for you is, given the current structural pressures on higher education, what do you wish undergraduates knew about the future of studying humanities?
Can I just confirm, you said that, and the end part of that question, given the pressures on higher education, you said, what do you wish undergraduates knew about? Can you just, sorry, what was the second half of that question?
The future of studying humanities.
Thank you. It's a tough one. I don't know if I want to be the first one to answer it.
I don't know that any of us know the future. Like, I think that is the issue because, people were freaking out about the humanities when I was a student, both an undergrad and a PhD student. I think we were just perpetually freaking out about the humanities. And I think what I wish and what I tell my students is to get creative and strategic about your future and what you want it to look like. Don't follow whatever prescribed thing, or at least follow it with open eyes, right? I think it's no longer acceptable or appropriate or sufficient to just kind of wait along the trajectory, undergrad, master's, PhD, job, X, Y, and Z. I think it's you have to be more strategic and more creative in this current moment about your qualifications and about what you want your life to look like, what you want your future to look like, and then start making moves and adjust to build that future. And I think, I think we just need to stop relying on kind of like the degree is the cornerstone to like all that we can do and accomplish. So I don't know what the future is, but I know we've been freaking out for a long time and we're all still here, right? And we're all still navigating this like shithole of a world. So I think like just keep figuring out what you need and like building toward that.
If no one else wants to respond to Nicole, Michelle, I think you had a hand up.
Yes, it's not really, well, first of all, I just want to say, this was just super helpful. Like, I took down a bunch of notes from what every one of you shared, and it just feels, at minimum, I feel like I gained a lot of encouragement. Yeah, I just feel very encouraged and I feel a lot more excited. I think I was feeling very anxious and very dreadful about it all, but this feels at minimum, I know there are like a lot of people out there like you all that are willing to help and willing to like give us some of your time to provide some guidance, to provide information on how you've navigated it all. So yeah, I just wanted to communicate my appreciation and thank you all for sharing so much with us and for being so generous.
Thank you for coming.
Does anyone else have any questions for our panelists? Yes, Allison.
I have a question, and my hand raise feature was being wonky, so I decided to do it the old-fashioned way. First of all, thank you so much, all of you. This has been really great to hear about the range of positions. As someone who's been kind of out of the PhD for a few years, but is currently on the job market, I kind of have a question about what you all were talking about both the personalization process and the kind of transferable skills question, particularly in terms of applying for jobs that fall outside of the traditional academic sphere and that maybe you would be an unconventional fit for, perhaps. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how to kind of position the materials, particularly if you kind of have materials that are very geared toward the academic market in the past, how you think about positioning both yourself and your application materials to make yourself legible to those kinds of institutions or those kinds of positions.
Can you just like give us a field or like where you're gesturing toward? Because I just feel like I think we all are thinking of answers, but I think we could be more specific to you. Like, are you talking about like the arts and culture sector? Are you talking about literary publication sector? Like, where are you heading?
Sure, I recognize I asked it a very vague question. So I was wondering more in terms of arts and culture, and also maybe more of kind of I particularly was thinking in a slightly different field. 'Cause I'm thinking kind of a game design field, but sort of like something that may be more of a creative field or arts and culture field where there's some overlap with academia, but it's maybe not as intuitive or direct.
So the first thing I can think of is the difference between the CV and the resume. And I think that that's a really important distinction to kind of understand, because the main takeaway, I mean, this doesn't have to be necessarily a workshop, but the main takeaway is the translation between your skills and your experiences directly. So if you've looked at a resume recently, they're wild, but they kind of break out the specific skills and tasks, like your role. So you're not just saying I published a list of things, which is impressive to academia, but tells nobody in game like business or design or tech what you actually are capable of. So it's like if you taught something or you led an initiative, break it out into very concise, and there's obviously a lot of resources out there for how to build a resume, but I think that's one easy way. And I would start there, because as you start to transition your skills from CV to resume, you start to kind of like home in on like the very aspects of your qualifications, essentially. And then also your cover letter, like an academic cover letter is like, I don't know, what is it, 3 pages? I write for 3 pages. I'm like, I did all this stuff, and you just go on forever and you're really proud and it works. Like a cover letter for outside of academia, you're start like one page, like stop talking, like, so I think if you submit an academic cover letter for a non-academic job, they're literally not going to read it. And, having sat on so many committees at this point, job search committees, it becomes very apparent who has not done the translation work between, whatever they may have done before and whatever they're trying to do. So I'll just leave it at that, but just like making sure that your materials match and are legible quite literally to your audience.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the resume does a lot of work that the CV doesn't do, or they do different work. So knowing the difference between those is really important. And the cover letter is the best advice I've gotten about cover letters is tell me why you should meet with me. Like, why should we talk? Right. So demonstrating an interest in the place that you're applying to and the kind of work that they do. This is not the time to talk about your how you are intervening in academia, right? This is not a time to talk about, yeah, the hole that you're filling in the discipline, right? They don't care about the discipline. And maybe they do, but they don't for the cover letter. The cover letter is about why should we have an interview with you, right? So introducing yourself again, I mean, it's everyone has said this, I think, but Emma said it really well that, tell them who you are, right? Really tell them who you are and why you're interested, like why you're really interested, not the thing you think they want to hear. And I really think that people respond to that kind of genuine communication and genuine enthusiasm. I feel like another piece of advice that I really don't like is like, I think this is maybe in The Professor is In, which I think is a useful book. Maybe Emma and Edie have more things to say about that book in terms of being on the academic job market. But one of the pieces of advice sometimes that I hear is like not to sort of be too like enthusiastic because it makes you seem like desperate or something, or that it like infantilizes you. I think that's bad advice. I think you actually want to have a personality and seem like you care about things in the world beyond the tiny little corner of the academic world that you might feel like you occupy, but you don't. You occupy the world just like every other human. So I would just sort of plug all of that in addition to what Stephanie was saying.
I obviously don't have personal experience getting a job post PhD outside academia, but just speaking from a few people I know who have, one other thing I would add is that in academia, on the academic job market, there's obviously a big taboo against you wouldn't like contact, one member of a search committee to talk to them before they've brought you to campus or anything like that, right? It would be like overstepping. Um, and academia networking is kind of weird overall and sort of confusing and whatever. But I think it can be helpful to remember that like networking in that way or just reaching out is not the same kind of it's not the same kind of ritual outside of academic space. And so sometimes I know some people who've gotten jobs because they actually just contacted someone who worked there and said, here, I'm really interested in this. This is what's kind of unusual about me. Like, can you tell me a little bit about this place? And then when they did apply for a position, then that person knew that this person was making a big transition from academia into the museum world or a cultural institution or whatever else. And so, I think like I would immediately, having been in academia so long, be like, oh, I can't possibly email them. They'll think I'm trying to sneak my way ahead or something. But it's like that's not true. And so that I don't know if that's helpful, but it startled me to realize how much I'd internalized this sense that there was like only a specific way you could talk to people in a specific time and all of that. And that's just not at all true in many other sectors.
I think that's totally true. People like to be asked for advice, and people like to be asked to connect people. Like this is something that people enjoy doing. It's not a burden. And if it is and they don't have time, then they won't respond. That's fine. But a lot of people want to be helpful.
Yeah. I will also just add that when you do get the interview, immediately go into self-advocacy mode. Did they tell you who's going to be on the committee? Did they tell you how long the interview is going to be? Did they send you the questions in advance? None of these are weird questions at all, both in academia. Like I've applied literally for recent academic job and just got it. They told me who was going to be on the interview. you know why? So you can do your research, you can stalk the heck out of them and then tailor all your answers to be specifically designed to like get into their brains. Like, you know, it's just, you have to do your homework. It's so competitive out there, but self-advocate, right? How long? Is there anything I should prepare in advance? Is there anything you'd like to see from me that you know, I didn't already send as part of the application materials? Often they'll say no, but sometimes, you know, they'll send questions. These are the things that we're going to ask you. Amazing. Had I not asked, they wouldn't have sent it. You know, so just start thinking like the second you get an interview, you're not asking too much if you're asking for those kinds of things, you know. I think especially the time, like usually they tell you, they're so good about being like, this is gonna be a 20-minute Zoom or this, because also if they say this is gonna be a 20-minute Zoom, you know that your answers need to be punchy and concise because it's gonna be, you don't have much time with them. If they're like, this is gonna be an hour-long Zoom, then you better prepare some questions because, you know, that means they're gonna give you some time. You can even ask, will I have some time to ask my own questions in this context? And if they're like, oh no, then that's okay, you come prepared. Or if they are like, oh yeah, we'll leave time for questions, it just shows that you're taking initiative, but also give yourself as much information as you possibly can so you can be the most prepared when you go into like the interview context.
Great. Are there any last questions for our panelists? I'm sensing that the answer is no. Thank you all. So yes, Michelle.
Sorry, just one last more logistical question. I just wanted to put it out there if the panelists, if any of you all are open to staying in touch with us, if you can share which is the best way to reach you, whether it's a public platform or an email. Yeah, I just appreciate it. But if you're not, that's okay too, because I know you all mentioned having a lot to do within the work that you already do. Regardless, we appreciate the time that you've given us here.
I think our panelists are putting their contact information in the chat. Thank you all so much for attending this talk, and let's give a big round of applause to our four wonderful panelists for a very illuminating and encouraging discussion. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Great. I think we are going to end the discussion there. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again, wonderful panelists. This is very exciting.
Right. Do you need anything else from us?
I don't think so. Nisarg is the one who organized the details, so I'm sure if he needs something, he will get in touch. But thank you all. This was a really lovely discussion. I'm very glad I got to have it with you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Aiden. And thanks for the great questions. They were really insightful. I really appreciated them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you so much. It was so nice to meet you.
Yeah,
So
nice
nice
to
to
meet
meet
everyone.
Yeah, great to meet you all.
Yeah. Emma, we should get coffee, by the way. We're neighbors.
Oh my God, yeah, I realized when you asked where I was and I said New York, and then I was like, wait, you're also, yeah, okay, great.
Yeah. And same with Edie and Jessica. If you're ever in the city, like, please, let's all get
Yeah.
together.
For sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
See you.
Cool. Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Nice meeting you. Bye.
Bye.